Okay, it looks like everyone's in. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Hoping to have a couple more people trickle in here, but in the meantime, we can get started. First off, thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. I know our committee this summer has been a little behind the 8 ball. We're trying to pick things up for the second half of the year and doing these Zoom. So I appreciate you guys coming on and making some time to speak with Gene, Meghan, and I. Just as a reminder, my name is Lauren Vassallo. I am the co-chairwoman of the Society of Professional Journalists Sports Committee. Meghan Robinson is here today, who is also a member of our committee, and she's going to be spearheading this conversation with Gene. Meg and Gene go way back. I will say, if you guys have a question, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom to ask your question, and we'll get to you when we do. And when we do call on you, just please state your name, your college or your profession, and where you're calling from. And just make sure all of your questions are journalism related. You know, don't be asking Gene for any sort of insider tips, trading, you know, anything like that. So that being said, I'm going to kick it off to Meg Robinson. Go ahead, Meg.
Hi, everybody. I'm Meg Robinson. I'm currently the Director of Broadcast and Digital Media for the Big Sky Conference. Gene and I worked together for, 5-6 years at ESPN. Spent a lot of time traveling to different cities for college game day. Gina, I'm going to do a little background on you. If any of this is wrong, blame Tennessee, because I got it from their press release. Gino will be teaching a course at his alma mater, University of Tennessee, this fall. He is a sports writer and award-winning reporter. He started his career as a writer covering college football and basketball, including stints at the Chicago Tribune, Denver Post, Dallas Morning News, and LA Times. Became a senior writer for ESPN, the magazine, back in 1998, and then was named senior national sports columnist for ESPN in 1995. He is a 3-time New York Times best-selling author, has authored and co-authored, I believe, 12 books and biographies, including ones with Jerome Bettis, Reggie Miller, Bill Walton, Kirk Herbstreit. He transitioned into a TV role where he contributed features to College Game Day, Sports Center, SC Featured, and covered major events like the Masters, British Open, Special Olympics, and has won 7 Emmys and 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards. And if you don't know, Edward R. Murrow Awards are one of the hardest awards to win. So, Gene, you are very accomplished, to say the least, and we're so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here and glad to see you again.
You too. Now, I'll just get right into some questions. You know, Gene, you started out as a writer, and the space is currently, it changes every year with different paths with the addition of digital. But for your career, how did you transition from being a writer to being an on-air personality?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word personality with me, but I think I was just in the right place at the right time. I was writing a lot of golf at the time. I was writing a lot of college football and basketball. And a guy at ESPN named Lee Fitting, who was running game day at the time, sort of took notice of that and decided maybe my chops as a reporter on the print side and magazine side and digital side and my experience in college sports might help game day. So he gave me a shot. And on the golf side, Mike McQuaid, who was overseeing and still oversees ESPN's golf coverage, basically gave me the same chance. And I would say the early returns were disastrous. I had no idea what I was doing. And if not for producers like yourself and people like Tom Rinaldi, I would be bagging groceries at Piggly Wiggly right now, because it really was nightmarish. And but just thanks to their help and the patience of McQuaid and Fitting, and I'll give myself a little credit for hanging in there, I sort of got the feel for it. And some of the essentials crossed over. And then it was just a matter of learning how to do the TV side of it. And that's kind of how it happened. But there certainly was a learning curve.
What was some of the learning curve and the challenges of the transition from print to television?
Well, I mean, from a practical standpoint, standing in front of a TV camera and a red light goes on and a producer's in your ear and they start saying talk and you don't know what the hell they're talking, and you start conversing with them and the producer's going, no, you're on live, talk. And that happened to me at my very first appearance at the Masters, doing a Sports Center hit. And to say that they put yellow police tape around that hit when I was done, I mean, it was horrific. And after it was done, I went to Mike McQuaid's office and I said, look, if you don't ever want to put me on TV again, I totally understand. And he said, no. And this has always stuck with me. He goes, I did not put you in a position to succeed. And he basically gave me a mulligan. And after that, I got a little bit better. And the transition really comes in just getting comfortable in front of a television camera and getting the reps. And the more reps I got, the more comfortable I got, the better I got. But the things from the print side and digital side and magazine side, how to report a story, how to conduct an interview, how to put a story together, and in my case, adapting it to script writing, you know, those things, you know, I sort of had those core abilities and learned to get better at it. So yes, thank God they were patient enough with me, but applying what I'd learned from the print side to the television side, that was fun to do. Then it was just a matter of learning the sort of the performance part of it. And I was never great at the performance part of it, but at least I got to the point where I didn't embarrass myself anymore.
Gino, by the time that you and I worked together, you were already a seasoned veteran on game day, had been on the show for years. But since then, I had worked with a handful of writers turned on-air talent. And one of the biggest things is that writing for TV is completely different from writing for print. What advice, I don't know how many people on here are writers, but who have aspirations of being on air, but what advice do you have for making that transition on writing a story for TV versus an article?
Yeah, well, it's like learning a new language. You go from English to Portuguese. And I would tell anyone who wants to try to make that transition is lose all your adverbs, all your adjectives, all your instincts as a writer to explain everything. You just don't do that in script writing. You can do it a little bit. You can take your language abilities for a walk once in a while, but you have to learn that the stories hold hands with the pictures. And I had to learn that the B-roll, the cutaways, game side, all those things, they had to work hand in hand with the script. So the images are really the varsity team, and your script, while very important, it is almost complementary in a way. The images drive the story with the help of the script. You have to be much more concise. You have to be much more declarative. And you have to get the viewer from point A to B to C to D to E with the help of the images. When you're writing a column, or if you're writing a long feature, or a short feature or a news story, you're sort of the boss as the writer. When you're writing a script for TV, especially a feature, the images are sort of the boss of it all. So that wasn't that hard for me to learn to do, but it definitely took some getting used to, because you're used to just help the story along, take the reader's hand and pull them along. And that's just really not the case when you're doing a TV feature.
I mean, honestly, Gina, we've probably done 20 to 30 pieces together at least. I'd have to go back and count them. But, you'd write a script and then I'd be in edit and be like, I don't have video for this. What's your advice for, when you want to, you need to get a point across and you have something written beautifully, but you don't have the video to support it. How do you adapt in those situations?
You go in the corner and you weep because you have to cut out a track that you're really proud of and that you think would have really helped the story. And that was part of my learning curve. Like, oh, we don't have that. Why can't we get that? And then I'd have a producer like yourself go, we either can't get it, or there isn't time, or we don't have the money to do it, or we couldn't get clearance for this. I had to get used to that. And there's a lot of give and take. And you have to learn to live with the idea that you can't get everything that you want. And sometimes something has to fall to the floor. And even if it's a beautifully, not that I would do something that was put together beautifully, but on rare occasion, if we couldn't cover it, it had to go. So there is a lot of give and take. And I learned to sort of, as we were reporting the story, if we were out in the field, I learned in my mind, okay, here's something I might want to do when I'm sitting down to do the script. Let's shoot that right now. So we've got it covered. And through time, I learned to work with you, Meg, and other producers to like, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Let's get this now, just in case we want to use it. So you have to sort of think ahead, where when I first started, I just didn't have that in mind. I didn't know that you didn't have access to everything.
One of the things too is, I just completely lost my train of thought, but it was a question based on having video and not having video. Well, one question that I've always wanted to know that I've never asked, and this is just a silly one, on game day, when you guys all do your lead-ins for pieces, do you have a prompter, or is that all just from memory?
No, there's no prompter in game day. I mean, it is a truly live show. And there have been a few times where I just screwed up my lead or my tag. There was one time at an Army-Navy game where I basically had to reverse the Army-Navies. I mean, I totally screwed it up. And I stopped myself and I said, you know what? We're going to start this lead all over again. We're going to switch the Armies to Navy. And Lee Fitting was in the truck and I could hear him laughing in my ear because it was so historically bad. But I learned when you're doing live television that it's okay. You can screw up once in a while and you can like take a breath, and what you think when you're on camera is like lasting for an hour. It really is only for a moment or two. And if you just laugh at yourself and go, you know what, we're going to do this over again, everything's okay. But no, there are no teleprompters on game day. So I would jot down a few notes. I would look at my notes before Reese or Chris Fowler tossed to me, and then off you go. There's absolutely no prompters. And I would do shows like, it's not on ESPN Air anymore, but it's called The Sports Reporters. And that was all prompter. And I felt like I was just stealing money. Like, wait, I can just read this? Whereas game day and the Masters or the Open Championship or the PGA Championship, everything's live and everything is, you just got to have it here. And you learn how to just use a few words instead of writing out your entire lead and your entire tag. You jot down a few words, you'll look at it right before you go on, and you kind of use that as your roadmap.
Yeah. You guys are always so good as, I'd always watch to see my feature air, and then I'm like, that was so good. And I've always wondered, like, they have their note cards, but do you have a prompter too? And that's just backup in case it goes down.
No. And one other thing, Megan, to your point about sometimes you have to lose something in your story. Either it's a track that you have to lose, or they're going to give you 4 minutes and 20 seconds and you wanted the 5. and believe me, you know, Meg and I and all producers and all reporters at Game Day and Sports Center Featured, you had on Friday nights or whenever your story was going to run, you had these fist fights with the sort of the executive producer or with the producer of Game Day. Can we please just get 15 more seconds? And they go, no, we don't have the time. So whatever we would cut from the story, I would try to salvage that and use it in my leader tag. If I thought it was something that really helped the story, I would, that way we could still get use of it, even though it might not appear in the story, maybe something that a fact or a little vignette that I could use, I try to use in the leader tag.
The worst though, Gina, was when you had 3:30 for a story and then you're like, actually, we need to make this 3:15 because we need to give 15 seconds to another piece. I'm like, what about my piece? I want my piece.
Yeah, well, and on Game Day, we would always, you know, Rinaldi and I or Jen Latta, you know, like, really, Herb Street and Desmond, you got to talk about the Akron game for 20 more seconds. I mean, that could have been 20 seconds that we could have used in a feature. And for people who are just watching this, you know, Game Day, they allot a certain amount of time to the features. And I'm not complaining about it when I was on the show. You know, there were plenty of times where they gave me 6-7 minutes, but there are other times where, you know, hey, we need to do this in 2:20. And you'd be like, there's just no way. But every time I would say that, I would watch a John Hartman piece on CBS News where he does something that's profound and amazing in 2:10. And I just like, I quit your bitching, Gino. This guy does, you know, Peabody Award winning quality work, and he does it in 2 minutes and 10 seconds. And that's when you learn just like, okay, figure it out and do it.
I remember what I was going to ask before I got sidetracked by my prompter question. So for Game Day, we would have to turn, for those who don't, the process of a typical Game Day week for the Game Day fans out there for features is we get our assignment Sunday, Monday, sometimes maybe Tuesday. We'll be on a plane Monday or Tuesday, and basically the piece would be on air by Saturday. So you have like a day to shoot, a day to write a script, a day. It's very fast paced. And Gino, you would have scripts churned out so quickly. Like, what was your scripting process? Because that's something in my career now, flipping it to be on air and writing my own stuff, like, you don't have a ton of time to do all of the things, but you always seem to get it done in a very fast pace.
Well, I mean, there's a famous quote from Red Smith, you know, how do you write a column? He was a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist for the New York Times. He said, you just, you know, open a vein and bleed. And sometimes that's how you have to do it when you're writing. I would stare at a blank screen just like everybody else has at one time or another. Other times I would just have it in my head. I just know exactly how I wanted to structure the story. And then it was just a matter of dropping in the elements and the bites that we had in the tracks. The longer I did Game Day and the golf and whatever else, the easier it became. But basically, as Meg said, we might get our assignment. If we were lucky, we'd get our assignment on a Sunday. Normally, you'd get it on Monday, and you're on a plane Monday night. And then Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, you'd be shooting. Sometimes you'd have to go to multiple cities. And then when I would get on a plane Wednesday night, you know, Meg or whoever the producer is would try to get me the interview for me, so I could at least look at it, the transcripts. I could look at it on the plane. I'd get up at 5 a.m. on a Thursday morning and try to crank out the script. I'd catch a flight later that day to go to the Game Day site. And then on, you know, Thursday and Friday, Meg or the producer, they would be in edit. We would have the usual fist fights with Ben Weber, who oversaw the Game Day projects. And then, you know, hope that it was put to bed by midnight that night. I might have to retract something on a Friday night or late Friday afternoon, but that was basically the process. And then Saturday, you'd do the show, get on a plane, and then Sunday, just crank it up again. And it was like that basically for 5.5 months. It was brutal. It's a brutal, it was like doing network television when West Wing, or I don't know, whatever what your favorite show was, they would crank out 22, 23 of those episodes. And I got a taste of that by doing game day, because it's sort of the same thing.
Gino, my favorite, people have asked me a lot in different scenarios, like, what's your favorite story that you've ever done? And my answer is a story that I did with you. Do you have a guess on what it might be?
No, go ahead.
Body Bearers.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah.
That's like my all-time favorite story. What is your favorite? And it doesn't have to be with me. I won't take offense. You've done a lot of great work. But what is your favorite feature that you've ever done for television? And then also the print story. It could be the same, can be different.
Well, there's two or three, if you'll oblige me on that. Yes, Body Bears, and for anybody who didn't see that, and no offense if you didn't. In fact, I don't know if Meg, if you came up with that idea, or
I thought you did.
it might have been. I honestly don't remember. But there is a group of Marines based in DC. They're at a historic barracks, and basically their job is to carry the caskets of those who served overseas and who died, and or it could be someone who came back and later in life died and are buried at Arlington Cemetery. And the reason we did this story is one of the body bearers was a former football player. Or no, he was a football player. He'd been a body bearer. And so he had served in the military, served in the Marines, and then went back and played football at an older age. And they would train in this, basically a parking garage, and the physical requirements of it were mind-boggling. And so anyway, we did this story, and I love that story just because it was so unusual. I like stories that aren't Trace McSorley, the Penn State quarterback. He's a winner. Go to a state college and do a story on the quarterback because he's a star. That's not a story to me. Body Bearers was a story. I did a story on a kid, Chad Carr, and he was a little 5-year-old kid who died of a very rare form of brain cancer. And there was a connection. His family, Lloyd Carr was his grandfather, who had won a national championship at Michigan. The kid's dad had played at Michigan as a quarterback. The mom, her dad had been an All-American at Michigan. And anyway, it was how Jim Harbaugh and his team basically embraced Chad Carr, and a little sweetheart of a kid. And he died because there's no cure for it. But it was just how Michigan embraced him, and Tammy Carr, the mom, and Jason Carr had let us come into their house literally the weekend that Chad died. And we were there when hospice was there. We were there when he was just in his final hours of life. And it was just an incredible experience when someone, and I tell people this all the time, and I think Nicole Kraft's on this call from Ohio State. I tell journalism classes all the time, you are given a trust, and you have to honor that trust. And when a family lets you come into their house, when their 5-year-old child is literally hours away from death, you have to, they're trusting you to tell their story in an honorable and honest way. And I always kept that in mind. So I'm still in contact with the Carr family. And then I think the third story was one where I went with a former NBA player. I think he was still in the league when we did it. His name was Marc Gasol. He was playing for the Memphis Grizzlies at the time. And he was going overseas to work in basically to help rescue refugees who were trying to escape Africa, and were making this this journey from Africa over to Europe, and basically doing it on, you know, in styrofoam coolers and little rafts, and anyway, the Libyans were basically getting them, shooting them, and basically watching them drown. And we were on these two vessels that were trying to beat the Libyans to the refugees and rescue them. And so it was this amazing 9-day journey in the Mediterranean, and basically these death journeys from Africa to Italy or Malta or wherever they could find a port that would let them in. And so that was just an incredible journey. But at one point, we came upon a raft that had housed, I don't know, maybe 20 refugees, and there were dead people there, and you're right there, and there was one woman who clung to a little piece of wood, and I don't know what caused her to keep the grip, but we rescued her, and we pulled her from the gasoline-soaked waters and pulled her into this raft that we're in. And Marc Gasol, the NBA player, is part of this. And anyway, it was just chronicling his 9 days on this NGO, on these vessels to rescue these refugees. And so, you know, we live in a world of sports, but that was like a world of life and death. And it really affected me, and still does when I think about it. So I've been very lucky to do a lot of great stories, not because of me, just because they were great stories to do. I had wonderful producers, and I was lucky enough to be part of that. But to me, it was all about honoring the trust of these people. And we later went back and found this woman, and she had been relocated to Spain. And we found her, her life had just, in 6 months later, had totally changed. And you just think back to pulled out of the water, who knows how much longer she could have hung on to. She's a human being, and she has a life, and she found this second act of her life, and it was just incredible. And for that, I'm always eternally grateful to ESPN for allowing us to go do those kinds of stories. I'm sorry I went on way too long on that one.
No, I think that was beautiful. I'm just going to chime in here. You know, some of my favorite stories that you and all reporters do have that crossover of sports and life. I remember myself as a kid, I wanted to be a writer, and Rick Riley was like my guy, reading that last page in Sports Illustrated. And I thought he always did such a good job of kind of combining life, culture, and trauma, and like whatever else into his writing. So I think that that's what evokes emotion, right? And like that's what we're all trying to get, to be entertained, but entertainment could be a myriad of emotions and feelings. Just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, to use that raise your hand feature. We're happy to take some questions. But Gene, I have another follow-up too. And I remember asking Rinaldi this question when we had him on. You know, as I find that a little bit of imposter syndrome, I guess, where I'm trying to find story ideas. And I think because of the vast amount of information that we're able to get nowadays, whether it be social media, whether it be newspapers, whether it be websites, you know, whatever it might be, nothing necessarily feels like an original story idea anymore. Do you find that you kind of grapple with that as well? And to that end, how do you find your story ideas? Do you make cold calls? Do you just look at little small town newspapers and read those and see what you can get tidbits out of there? What's your process in finding story ideas?
Well, Rick and I worked together at the Denver Post and the LA Times, and we were best friends for a very long time. And we used to talk writing all the time. And I would tell anybody who's interested in that, find someone and just knock around stuff. I mean, we would talk for hours about how do you structure your story? What do you do what's your philosophy as far as a lead? How do you want to end a story? How do you use quotes? And he would always tell me, and it always stuck with me, always make one more call. And I always thought that was a brilliant idea, and you could see it in Rick's writing. And I've said it many times, I will take a great reporter over a great writer any day of the week. In Rick Riley's case or Wright Thompson's case, they're both. J.R. Moehringer, both. And it's very rare to find those folks, but they're out there. I do all of the above, all the things that you just said. I just spent my weekend going through 50 weekend Wall Street journals and just tearing out things. And maybe it wasn't a sports story, but it was a story I could maybe apply to sports. Or maybe it was just a cool story that I could try to do for somebody else. Game day, I would reach out to the SIDs, just send sort of a mass email. Hey, there's somebody on your team or a staff member that just has a cool story that you know about. Doesn't have to be the star. It can be the walk-on. It can be the fourth string guy. Doesn't matter. Send it my way. Steve Hartman gets little, I think I called him John Hartman earlier. Steve Hartman gets these little tips from people, and they turn into great stories. I did a story on a kid who was at Maryland. He was a second string linebacker, and someone had written a very small little thing in the student newspaper about how he had escaped Libya as a youngster. And we ended up doing a story. He had escaped the civil war in Libya. And we ended up going back to Libya because of this small little story and reuniting him with his mom, who was not able to get to the States with him. And it turned out to be an incredible emotional story. There's a million places where you can find stories. I'm here at the University of Tennessee, and they sent me to this warehouse today to, if you needed some furniture for your office. But it turned out it was all like second and third hand furniture that had been donated or had been given from other departments. And so I'm talking to the guy, and we're walking around. I go, where do you get this stuff? And he goes, it's just departments that don't need it anymore. I go, do you ever get any weird stuff? He goes, oh yeah, we got a cadaver table over here. And we've got, this from the body farm, because Tennessee has a body farm here for a forensic science. And we got this over here, and we have this printing press from the 1900s. And I started jotting this stuff down, and I thought, I'm going to give this to the student newspaper, because this would be a really cool little feature about this warehouse where all this crazy stuff is. And so you find it in the most unusual places from the most unusual people. And so very long answer to your question, but there's 100 different ways of getting good story ideas. Yes, small town newspapers. Yes, Wall Street Journal. Yes, any place that you can get a good feature.
Yeah, and I think, to that end, asking those questions and getting curious, right? Because had you not asked, do you get any weird stuff? I'm not sure if that would be like a question that I would ask someone in your situation, but you knew to ask it. And now here you are with this potentially really great, student newspaper idea.
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, I don't necessarily agree with Wall Street Journal's politics, but I think they're brilliant at coming up with stories that I would have never thought of, that seem insignificant. I'm a big believer in a small story can turn into a large story. And I'm a big believer in, if it's a big macro story, like, today or the last few days, the stock market's gone totally in the tank. Find somebody small to tell that story. I don't know, a mom who invested her life savings and now she's, she's ready to jump off a bridge. I like trying to make small big and big small. And I love the way that Wall Street Journal, their writers or their editors, they find these cool little things that I can maybe apply to sports or apply to something else.
I love that concept. Make small big, make big small. Because I think a lot of times, I know for myself, I am always looking at the bigger picture, but if I can like start to piece it down and make it small, I can find a good story there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's start taking some questions here. Just a reminder, just let us know your name, where you're calling from, and your school or your profession. And let's start with Nick.
There's the unmute button. First and foremost, Gene, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it, as well as everyone else here. My name is Nick Mantis. I'm a sports reporter at KSAT in San Antonio. I've been here for just about a year. This is my third station, and I'm mostly MMJing and, running around and trying to, grab a local story here in San Antonio. And obviously we do a lot with the Spurs and, Wemby, that's our big deal, but it's Texas high school football. We're getting up at 6 a.m. to beat the Heat. And this is our schedule right now. Yeah. And so one of the things that I kind of been wondering is just when you're putting something together, especially with an MMJ lifestyle, you're from pitching to posting on the web, you're doing everything. And there are little moments in between different parts of my day where I feel myself kind of getting into almost like anchor mode in a way. And I'm tracking something and I think to myself, who came in, replaced you from the 1950s, and said, tonight on the news, this is how we're going to, so how are you able to use your writing and your scripts to keep it very natural and simple, especially for something like game day, where you're able to take somebody from A to B to C to D?
Okay, so first of all, great respect for guys like you and women like you who do that job. I never did that. Tom Rinaldi did it. I think he worked in South Bend and Oakland and maybe Portland. And I always loved talking to him because he would give me a perspective I just didn't have. This Chad Tuff story I was telling you about, it opened, we filmed it during the dead of winter. And it was probably late November, maybe mid-November. And, but the family, they knew Chad wasn't going to last much longer. They wanted to have Christmas for him. So my opening track was something to the effect of Christmas came early for Chad Carr. It had to. It was just 2 lines. That was kind of a lesson to me. Less is more, especially in emotional stories. And as far as tracking it, even is better than Christmas came early. I mean, you don't need to do any of that. And I had to learn that, believe me. I started, instead of reading my track, I would just say my track. And I felt like that helped. Not try to pop a word necessarily if I didn't have to, or try to help, the viewer really needs to know that this, you don't. You just need to say it. And you don't need to help it along most of the time. And especially when you're doing a story that's emotional and has drama and things like that, less is more. And it took me a while to learn that. And it took me a while to learn how to write that and track that. So I've done the 1950s broadcaster voice, and it was, it sounded terrible. And I got a phone call or something later saying, hey, you don't need to do that. Or they would tell me to retrack it on Friday. Hey, it just doesn't sound good. you know, or someone like Meg or my producer would go, yeah, let's give that another go. So that was all part of the learning curve for me. So I hope that helps you a little bit as far as what's worked for me in the past.
It did. Thank you.
Sure.
What's that old saying? Kiss, keep it simple, stupid, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't, yeah, I had to learn that. I thought, you know, if I'm writing something dramatic, I had to voice it dramatic. No, you don't. You just don't. The images are going to punch the viewer in the mouth. You don't need to do it, you know, with your track.
Let's take our next question. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I say your name incorrectly, but is it Yao?
Yes, it is.
Nice.
Okay, here we go. Let me turn on the camera here. Thank you, Gene, for taking the time. Sorry, I'm in the newsroom, so I got to be really quiet, but I'm a sports anchor reporter at WZZM in Grand Rapids. I started here in June after graduating from Hofstra. So I was wondering, what are some of the common mistakes you see among young journalists or things you don't think we think about enough? I have a second question too after, but you can answer the first one first. Sorry.
Okay. What mistakes you think that I see young journalists make, or
yeah, common mistakes or things that you don't think we think about enough when storytelling?
well, first you said Grand Rapids, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Reese Davis, who's the anchor for College Game Day, and is, you know, if I was doing a draft at ESPN, he would be, you know, a first rounder. He'd be one of my top 5 picks. You know, he got his start, I believe, in Flint, Michigan. So the first thing I would tell anybody is, you know, we all have our humble beginnings and we all learn in different places. And I just mentioned Tom Rinaldi and Reese, and, you know, we all start someplace. I started in a bureau in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to pretend I can say people make these mistakes, because I still make plenty of them. I would just say that sometimes we get caught up in the new shiny thing, when I'm a big believer in the old school stuff. The foundation stuff is the game changer. Know how to report, know how to interview, know how to write. If you can do those 3 things, you're going to be successful. The other stuff you can, in my case, learning how to look at a red light on a camera and get comfortable with it, or learning how to deliver a lead and tag or whatever, you can get that. But if you can't put together a sentence, if you can't ask a good question, and if you can't make enough phone calls or report a story, I don't care how good you are on camera, you're just faking it. So I would tell someone starting off in the business, get the basics, learn the basics, get really good at the basics, and you'll find the other stuff is going to seem simple after that, or much easier. So I would tell a young producer and a young reporter, while it might not sound very stylish and it's not very sexy, it's the difference between being successful and faking it, in my opinion.
This is going to be the soccer.
Thank you. My second question, if I could ask, I want to make sure that's okay. All right, great. Thank you. Which part of your storytelling is the furthest from where you want it to be? And what are you doing to improve that?
What do you mean by that?
So obviously writing is a skill, shooting is a skill, voicing is a skill. So when you look at kind of your reporting skill tree, is there something that isn't at the level you would like it to be at yet, personally?
I think I'm a pretty good reporter. I think I have good instincts. I think I know what a story is. And so that's where I start. And then I've learned to become a good interviewer, I think. And I learned when to talk and when not to talk when I'm doing an interview. And those were things, especially on the TV side. My learning curve on the TV side was much greater than my learning curve when I was a writer, just solely a writer. So learning how to combine those two, that was sort of the key for me. And once I figured that part out, I seemed to have more success. You know, I could still track better, and that's an art to me. But you know, I worked at ESPN almost 26 years, and in that 25th and a half year, I was still learning things about myself that made me a better reporter, writer, and on-air person. It never ends. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Yao. Mike, we're going to get to your question. I just want to finish up with Meg because we are starting to get short on time. So Meg, do you want to continue with your questions?
Yeah, I just have a couple more, Gino. You know, you mentioned that you were at ESPN for 26 years. You've been in the industry, what, 48, I think I read, is that in 4 decades you've been in the industry.
I started in 1980.
Okay. Yeah.
Do the math.
Long
time.
I went to Emerson. Math is not my thing.
You went to Emerson, Meg. Come on.
I know we don't do math there. Ask Lauren. But basically, you've been in the business a long time. You've seen people consume media in different ways. It's constantly evolving. What advice do you have for people to best align themselves for longevity in this industry?
Well, I've told journalism classes that when I started, we actually used a typewriter. I'm not sure they even know what a typewriter is half the time. And now we hold these little, you know, iPhones, and they pack more power than all the computers on Apollo 13. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And so I always have to remind myself and the students that whatever is today, technology-wise, in 2 years, it's going to be completely different, or 5 years, it's going to be completely different. And that changes the arc of how you do your job in a way. So I don't have any great advice on how to adapt other than be nimble, be ready to adapt, be ready to try other things. We shoot things on our iPhones now. We don't necessarily always have to have a camera on the shoulder. But again, the basics always go from decade to decade to decade. That always travels. We talk about in football, defense travels, the basics always travel too. To me, that's the secret to longevity in our business, being able to adapt to the technology, but also using the basics all along. And I think that always works. At least it has for me.
You just talked about telling students, and you're about to start teaching in 2 weeks at Tennessee. And what you just said might be your answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's the biggest piece of advice or lesson that you hope your students take from your course this fall?
Well, I learned from I don't know, I've probably talked to, 50 J school classes during the course of my game day days, maybe more. I learned as much from them as I hope maybe they learned from me. I think it's important to really keep an open mind. And I'm 67 years old. I'm going to be teaching students who are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. But I learned from doing game day, interviewing college players, that the age thing's just a number. You have to figure out a way to connect. And it doesn't matter then that I'm an old guy and they're a young guy. Or young person, you have to find a common ground. And once you find that common ground, you connect. And so I hope that I can give them something from a perspective standpoint that they can apply to what they want to do. I hope I can help them as far as maybe getting a foot in the door in the industry, or if they do get a foot in the door, what to do once they get there. And I hope I can prepare them in a way that will be useful to them. You know, I'm a professor of practice, and so I want to give them something that's practical, that they can apply to real life situations. And yes, I do think there's a real need to understand the theory and the philosophy of journalism and of our profession. But at the end of the day, you have to apply all that stuff in the real world. So I hope I can do that for them or help them in some small way.
Well, I wasn't your student, but you helped me a lot in my career, and I definitely learned a lot from you. So
Well,
I
right
think
back at you.
that-
Yeah, and I would say that one final thing. On the television side, it's so collaborative, and I wasn't used to that. I came from a place where I was a reporter. I was doing everything. And when I moved to TV, I had to learn to work with a producer and to share my thoughts and to share my script ideas and not be so closed. And I had to learn to sort of not be so secretive or closed up. Just it's okay, you know, to share what you're thinking. And on the flip side, for the producer, for the camera person, for your audio person, if they have ideas, be willing to listen. And sometimes you get some great ideas by just being willing to listen to your team, because you are a team when you're out there. And I didn't realize that at first. And that was a hard lesson to learn.
I think that's really important that you said that too, because I've noticed that too from the editing end. So when I'm in the chair editing the piece and I'm speaking with the talent about my idea, like once we put this music here, we're gonna have the music sting and it's gonna fade out, it's gonna sound great. And they're like, I don't think it's gonna work. And I'm like, trust me, like once you hear it and once it's all pieced together, it's gonna sound great. And 90% of the time, once they see that working whip, they're like, okay, yeah, I see your vision now. And like, yeah, that works. So being collaborative, being open to those ideas. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to put out the best piece possible. So thank you for saying that as well. Okay, we have two more questions here, and let's go with Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Mike Fink. I've been writing about the NHL, and I've just started writing about the AHL for a site called the Hockey Writers. I've done that for the past 4 years. This past year, I was actually able to travel to some of the teams in Connecticut, cover the games in person there, which is good. I also recently started podcasting. I started doing that a few months ago. I've been doing it for both the site and another site. So I guess I'll ask from that transition is I like to write down my script and write down everything I want to talk about. And obviously there's this balance that you have where you want to cover everything, but when you're a host and when you're interviewing, there's always those times when they'll say important stuff. They'll say stuff that you really want to follow up on. And with podcasts, and certainly with you're doing television where you have 30 seconds or you have a minute, how do you balance that where someone says something where you're like, let me follow up on that, let me ask more on that or dive in. I mean, like I watched Dan Patrick, I think does a great job of that. I love like well he's able to like balance that and then transition into the next topic, balancing that when you have a compressed time podcasting. It's 40 minutes, 30 minutes, but certainly in TV too.
Well, first of all, Mike, if you can explain offsides in hockey, I'd really be grateful, because I've never understood it. But well, first of all, I love that you're doing other things. I'm proud of myself and my career that I've been willing to take a leap of faith and bet on myself, and newspapers, and then magazine, then digital, then TV, and then, you know, try things that aren't necessarily in your comfort zone. And you have varying degrees of success with everything, but it's always good to push yourself to try something. So I applaud you for that. I've never done a podcast. I was just listening to a series on the West Wing, the show that was in the early 2000s. And I'm a huge fan of Aaron Sorkin. I wanted to learn more about how he wrote a script. And so it was interesting to me to listen to their podcast. I love things where if you ask a question, instead of looking at your legal pad full of questions, listen to the answer. And that doesn't mean you can't ask some of your other questions, but to your point, if someone says something interesting, you want to follow up. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be more interesting than the next question on your legal pad. I watch interviewers sometimes. You'll see the cutaways or 2-shot, and while the person is talking, they're staring down at their note card or their legal pad. They're not hearing. They're not listening. To me, that's such an important thing. So to hear you say, I want to follow up with something, those are great instincts to me. Yes, when you're doing, like if I was doing after the Masters, I used to have to interview the winner. And we would have basically 5 questions we could ask. So you had to make a decision during that. If I'm talking to Scotty Scheffler, and then the second question, he says something that's really interesting, I'm going to use one of my 5 questions on the follow-up. And maybe I have to lose something on the back end, but that's a decision you make in real time. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. But I think follow your gut on that. And if you have the luxury of a 30-minute podcast, wow, I mean, you can go wherever you want with that conversation. So, and it is a conversation when you're doing podcast. When I'm doing SportsCenter Featured, and I've got to, I know I only have 6 minutes for this piece. Well, I got to be really judicious in what parts of that transcript I'm going to drop in there. So everything's a choice. But I love the idea of a podcast because it gives you a freedom that you don't have in other situations.
Yeah. I mean, I'm noticing as I'm starting that all these rookie mistakes that I'm making, I'm trying to correct them as I go. But yeah, this is one of them. So thanks a lot. With the refs, by the way, people have been trying to screw over officials since the beginning of time. So people think the officials are screwing over their team since the beginning of time. So no one knows what an offsides is. It's okay.
Okay, good. I feel better about myself. Thanks for the question, Mike.
We have one more question from Nicole Kraft. Go ahead, Nicole.
Hey, Jane, how are you?
Well, I just want to tell people I've spoken to Nicole's fantastic classes over the years when we'd come there for game day. And I was just at the UT bookstore today ordering her book for my students called Always Get the Name of the Dog, right? Is that?
That is it.
So
Thank you.
I'm going to use this in my class. Nicole does a great job and did a great job with that book.
Thank you so much. Well, my question is, in the time that you've been coming to class, we've seen an evolution in sports media that's challenging. And so, instead of students saying that they want to be great writers or great broadcasters, they want to be Stephen A. and they want to be other people who are on game day now. And it's a really difficult conversation when you're like, why? What you got to build these skills up before you decide that a persona is going to take you over. So I'm curious what advice you would have for your students and for my students who have really become kind of fixated on these big personalities that seem to be consuming the oxygen in the sports media landscape. And really, I think we're losing the oxygen of the people like you, such an extraordinary storyteller, and the people who make sports really come to life as this ultimate reality show that we all adore so much. How do we keep them kind of, put them in the right headspace to know what sports storytelling is all about?
Well, I get it. I mean, Stephen A. is a huge star at ESPN. There's no getting around it. And this is not a commentary on Stephen A. at all. The hot take world is not my particular brand of vodka. I don't think there's much there. It's like cotton candy, it's a lot of air. Now, I applaud those who are able to do it skillfully, like Stephen A., and create something there that I don't necessarily think is there. My career has been spent, drilling down on those issues and those stories, and not just 30 seconds, I'm going to give you right off the top of my head what I think. Pat McAfee has built he's an industry now based on huge personality. The power of personality has its place in our business. But for students who think that they're just going to do that, it's not that easy. And, everybody has a hot take. Not everybody can put together a story or report a story or do a deep dive into an issue. That takes real chops. And so, yeah, Stephen A. and McAfee and this is guys on, Dan Patrick and the guys on Fox, and hey, they all do a fantastic job at what they do. It's not something I aspire to. So I have to wrap my head around, just like you have, this idea that students and young journalists think this is the way to go. And go ahead, give it a shot, go for it. But just know that it's a very small pool of those folks who have been able to break through. And it takes a certain personality and a certain bravado to make it work. And the ones who are really good at it are really good at it. And the ones who are wannabes are really bad at it. And to me, there's not a whole lot of in between. So great, go for it. God bless. Just know that it's not as easy as it looks. And I think I also think, Nicole, that everything works in cycles. And I think at some point, everything's going to find its equilibrium, including this world of the hot take. My humble opinion.
And thank you for it. You're going to be a great instructor. I'm really excited.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, Gino, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I know that this was like months in the works and we got thrown off everyone's schedules, but this has been super insightful and I miss talking to you and hanging out with you from spending like every week together in the fall to not seeing each other. So this has been a little reunion.
Well, it's been fun. And I want to thank everyone who got on here and thanks for letting me pontificate a little bit. And I hope it was a little bit helpful. It certainly was a pleasure to talk to everybody and great seeing you again, Meg.
You too. Well, thank you for your time and thank you everybody for joining us. We're going to get working on our next few guests. So stay tuned for who those people might be.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Gene.
Bye-bye.